The wind howled through the empty grain silos like a hollow whistle, echoing across land that should have been mine. My boots crunched on the dirt, the once rich soil now cracked and dusty. A convoy of HOA trucks was lined up across the field, their engines rumbling like a war drum. And there she stood, Karen. Her hair was sprayed so stiff it didn't move an inch, her manicured nails glinting as she flipped through papers like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "I told you," she said with a smug smile, "you don't own this land anymore. We sold it." I stared at her, the weight of her words smashing into me. Not just a corner of my farm. Not just a section of my property. All 1,700 acres, gone. And the worst part? The land wasn't just where I lived, it was where I grew and supplied almost half the food for the surrounding towns. My wheat, my corn, my vegetables, all the work of generations of my family, taken. And now Karen, of all people, was in control of it. Or so she thought. Because what she didn't know yet was that I had already set in motion something she couldn't stop. Something that would turn her smug grin into a silent scream. Something that would make the entire HOA crawl to me, begging. But before I tell you how that happened, you need to understand exactly how we got here. I never liked the HOA. Most folks in our county avoided them unless they had no choice. But after my wife passed away 3 years ago, I stayed out of their drama. My life became simple: work the farm, keep to myself, and once in a while, give away fresh produce to families who were struggling. That's the thing about growing your own food, when you've got more than enough, it's not hard to be kind. And I believed in kindness like I believed in rain after a long drought. The trouble started when Karen moved into a big, flashy house just outside the small town limits. She came from the city and had this air about her. Like she thought the countryside was some kind of playground for her rich friends. Within weeks, she was elected HOA president, and I started hearing stories. People fined for hanging laundry outside. Families told they couldn't keep chickens anymore. Kids banned from riding bikes on certain roads. It didn't take long before she set her sights on me. At first, it was small stuff, complaints about unsightly tractors, letters saying my grain silos were out of compliance with neighborhood beauty codes. Which was ridiculous, because my farm wasn't even in their HOA jurisdiction. One morning, I caught her standing at the edge of my property line with 2 other HOA board members, pointing at my barn and jotting notes on a clipboard. I walked over, keeping my tone calm. "Morning. Can I help you folks?" Karen gave me the kind of smile that had no warmth in it. "Just doing a property review. You know, making sure everything's up to code." "My land isn't in your HOA," I reminded her. She tilted her head like I'd just told her a riddle she didn't like. "Not yet." I thought it was an empty threat. I was wrong. 2 months later, I got a letter in the mail stamped with an official county seal. The paper was cold in my hands as I read it. My land was being seized under an emergency jurisdiction expansion and placed under HOA control. I didn't even know that was possible. Turns out, Karen had convinced the county council that my farm was neglecting environmental responsibilities and endangering local property values. All lies. But they didn't bother to check. When I went down to the county office to protest, the receptionist just looked at me with tired eyes and slid another document across the counter. "I'm sorry. The sale already went through." The sale. My jaw tightened as I saw it in black and white. My 1,700 acres had been sold to a group of developers that, surprise surprise, had ties to Karen. For a week, I barely slept. My mind raced between anger, grief, and disbelief. All I could see when I closed my eyes was the faces of the people I'd been helping for years. Single mothers who counted on my food donations. Retired couples who bartered with me for fresh eggs and vegetables. Kids who came to my pumpkin patch every fall. I could have walked away. Started over somewhere else. But that would have meant leaving those people to starve once the developers gutted the land for profit. And that's when the idea hit me. It was risky, maybe even dangerous. But I still had one thing they couldn't take from me: my network. I'd been supplying food to grocery stores, farmers markets, and local restaurants for over 20 years. I had contacts everywhere. If I could redirect the flow of food away from the HOA-controlled land, I could choke their shiny new empire before it even got off the ground. I started small. I called up my oldest friend, Hank, who ran the biggest grain distribution company in the state. "Hank," I told him, "I need you to cut off every single supply deal tied to that land. No wheat, no corn, no nothing leaves there. Not a kernel." Hank didn't even hesitate. "Done." Then I contacted the smaller farmers, the ranchers, the orchard owners, anyone who sold to HOA-linked businesses. One by one, they agreed to reroute their shipments through me instead. The first week, Karen didn't notice. The second week, she started sending angry emails to suppliers. By the third week, the developers were panicking. The stores they promised to supply were empty. And that's when I decided it was time to turn up the heat. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I walked into the HOA's brand new community meeting hall. People turned their heads as I stepped inside, my boots leaving faint tracks on their polished floor. Karen was at the front, giving a speech about progress and modernizing the community. I waited until she finished, then raised my voice so everyone could hear. "Funny thing about progress," I said. "It doesn't taste very good when there's nothing to eat." The room went silent. Karen's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. I took a slow step forward. "You think you own this land now. But I own something more important, the food. And until you make things right, not a single bite grown here will leave this county without going through me." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Karen's face flushed red. "You can't," she started, but I cut her off. "Oh, I can. And I already have." Her mouth opened to argue, but that's when the heavy glass doors behind me slammed open. A man in a dark suit strode in, holding a thick envelope. His voice was low, but it carried through the hall like a crack of thunder. "Ma'am, you've been served." The room erupted into chaos. And that was just the beginning. The moment those words left the man's mouth, "You've been served," Karen's perfect posture crumbled. She blinked at the envelope like it was a live snake. The man in the suit stepped forward, handed it to her, and then turned on his heel without another word. The room was still buzzing with whispers, neighbors craning their necks to see what was inside. Karen tried to laugh it off, but the shake in her voice betrayed her. "Probably just paperwork. Nothing important." I could see her hands trembling as she tore it open. Her eyes darted left to right, scanning the contents. Then her face drained of color. She looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't have anything clever to say. I kept my voice calm but sharp. "You think you can push people around, Karen, but you've never met anyone who knows how to fight back in a language you understand. That," I nodded toward the envelope, "is a cease and desist order for illegal jurisdiction seizure, property fraud, and collusion with county officials." A few people in the back gasped. Others glanced at each other, suddenly realizing the queen bee of their HOA hive wasn't untouchable. Karen forced a smile, clearly trying to regain control. "This is ridiculous. It's nothing but a scare tactic." But I'd done my homework. The lawyer who filed that order wasn't just any attorney, he was a retired federal prosecutor who owed me a favor from years back, when I helped his family during a rough patch. And that was only my opening move. The meeting collapsed after that. Karen dismissed everyone early, claiming she needed to review some legal matters. I stayed behind, talking with a few neighbors who approached me quietly. Some of them had been fined by the HOA for absurd reasons. Others had been threatened with property seizures of their own. An older man named Frank leaned in close. "They tried to take my son's workshop last month," he said. "But he didn't fight back. He just packed up and left." His voice cracked. "I wish I'd known I could push back like you." I patted his shoulder. "It's never too late to stand your ground." That night, I went home and poured myself a cup of coffee, staring out at my empty fields under the moonlight. The sight twisted my gut. Those fields should have been green and alive, but the developers had left them untouched since they bought them, waiting for permits to build their precious luxury homes. They thought they had time. They didn't. I pulled out my phone and called Miguel, a longtime friend who ran one of the state's largest farm equipment rental companies. I told him to block any and all HOA-connected accounts from renting plows, tractors, or harvesters. If they wanted to work the land, they'd have to do it the hard way, by hand. Miguel chuckled. "You're mean, John." "I like it." "Not mean," I corrected him. "Strategic." 2 days later, I got a call from Hank. "You'll like this," he said, his voice almost giddy. "Karen's been calling around, begging for suppliers to sell to her directly." I told her I'd think about it, then hung up. I grinned. Good man. It was working. Slowly, but it was working. Without equipment and without my supply network, their plans were stalling before they could even break ground. But I knew Karen, she wouldn't go down without a fight. That fight came sooner than I expected. I was repairing a fence near the northern edge of my property when I heard the sound of engines. Not one, not two, but a whole fleet of vehicles. I looked up to see a convoy of glossy black SUVs kicking up dust on the dirt road. They pulled up just past the fence, and a group of people in suits stepped out, men and women with clipboards, cameras, and cold, calculating eyes. Karen emerged from the lead SUV, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "John," she called, "you didn't think I'd let you embarrass me without a response, did you?" I didn't answer, just leaned on the fence post and waited. She gestured to the group behind her. "Meet the County Environmental Task Force. They're here to inspect your remaining property for violations." The leader of the group, a tall man with slick back hair, stepped forward, pulling a badge from his pocket. "Sir, we've received multiple complaints about water contamination and unsafe farming practices on your land." My gut tightened. This wasn't just a petty move. This was an attack designed to destroy my credibility and cut me off from the people I was helping. And as they started walking toward my fields with their cameras, I realized just how far Karen was willing to go. I didn't move from where I stood, but my mind was already racing. I knew there was nothing on my land that could legitimately violate environmental codes. I'd kept everything up to standard for years. But Karen wasn't playing fair, and if the task force was on her payroll, they could find whatever they wanted to. The tall man with slicked back hair snapped his fingers, and 2 inspectors broke off from the group, heading straight toward my irrigation system. Another walked toward the barn, camera rolling. Karen trailed behind them like a queen overseeing her soldiers, every step dripping with smugness. "Make sure to get close-ups," she called out to them. "We don't want to miss any of the damage he's caused." I leaned casually against the fence post, masking the fury building inside me. "You might want to be careful," I said loud enough for all of them to hear. "Wouldn't want to trespass on land you don't fully understand." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh please, John. This isn't your kingdom." That's where she was wrong. Before they could set foot deeper into my property, a dusty pickup truck came barreling down the dirt road. It screeched to a stop beside me, and out stepped Sheriff Dale, a man who had known me since I was 10 years old. "Morning, John," he said calmly before turning his gaze toward the group. "What's all this?" Karen plastered on her sweetest voice. "Sheriff. Perfect timing. We're just here to conduct a lawful inspection." There have been multiple complaints. From who? Dale cut in, his voice low but sharp. Karen hesitated for a moment too long. Concerned residents, she said finally. Dale's jaw tightened. Funny. I've been sheriff here for 15 years, and I haven't gotten a single complaint about John's land. Ever. The tall man with slicked back hair stepped forward, trying to assert himself. With all due respect, Sheriff, this is under county jurisdiction. You'll find we have full authority to proceed. Dale didn't flinch. You'll find you're standing on private property without a warrant. That stopped them in their tracks. Karen's voice sharpened. Sheriff, you're interfering with an official. I'm preventing a trespass, Dale said, pulling a folded document from his pocket. And before you start crying foul, here's something you'll want to see. He handed the paper to the tall man. As he read it, the color drained from his face. It was a court-issued injunction, temporary, but binding, prohibiting any inspections, construction, or alterations on my land until the property dispute was resolved. Karen's jaw dropped. How? Dale cut her off again. You think John doesn't have friends in the right places? Ma'am, you've been picking the wrong fight. The task force packed up faster than I'd ever seen government workers move. SUVs kicked up dust as they sped away, leaving Karen standing there with her fists clenched at her sides. She glared at me like she wanted to burn a hole through my chest. This isn't over, she hissed. I smiled. I'm counting on it. After she left, Dale stayed behind for coffee in my kitchen. He leaned back in his chair and gave me a knowing look. You've rattled her, John. But rattled snakes are the most dangerous kind. You'd better be ready for what she tries next. I nodded. I'm ready. Truthfully, I wasn't sure I was. I'd seen Karen's determination before, but now it was turning into desperation. And desperation made people unpredictable. 2 weeks passed quietly. Too quietly. The developers had gone radio silent, the HOA wasn't holding meetings, and Karen had all but vanished from public view. I should have been relieved, but it only made me more uneasy. One morning, I was loading crates of fresh produce into my truck for a local food pantry when my phone buzzed. It was Hank. You might want to get down to the farmer's market, he said. Something's happening. I pressed for details, but he hung up after telling me to just hurry. When I arrived, I saw it immediately. Every single produce stall was empty. No tomatoes, no apples, no potatoes. Nothing. Farmers stood around looking furious, their stalls barren under the bright sun. What happened? I asked one of them. He shook his head. HOA trucks came in last night. Said we were violating new county distribution laws. They confiscated everything, John. Everything. The sound of engines behind me made my stomach drop. I turned to see a line of those same black SUVs pulling up, and stepping out of the first one was Karen, smiling like she'd just won. You cut off my food supply, she said sweetly. So I cut off yours. Her words landed like a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. Karen stood there with her arms crossed, flanked by 2 men in county uniforms, as if she'd just staged the greatest checkmate in history. Around us, the other farmers stared, their anger simmering into something dangerous. I stepped forward slowly. You stole food from families. From kids. All because I wouldn't bow down to you? Karen tilted her head with fake innocence. Oh, don't be so dramatic, John. It's just business. You made yourself my competitor, and in business, one of us has to lose. One of the farmers behind me shouted, You can't just take what we've grown. Karen smirked. Actually, under the Emergency Food Distribution Act. I cut her off. That act was written for disaster relief. Not for you to play petty queen. She shrugged, unfazed. Maybe. But while you were busy playing hero, I was busy making friends in the right offices. Friends who can make problems disappear, and properties change hands. Her convoy pulled away, leaving us standing in the empty market square. Hank walked up to me, shaking his head. She's got the county eating out of her hand. If she controls the supply chain from the farmers to the stores, she's going to starve out everyone who doesn't play by her rules. I didn't need him to explain further. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about every farmer within 50 miles. That night, I drove out to an old feed mill on the edge of town, a place most people forgot about years ago. It was owned by an old-timer named Walter, who'd been in the grain business longer than I'd been alive. He was stubborn, paranoid, and fiercely loyal to the people he liked, which, fortunately, included me. I told him what happened at the market. His eyes narrowed. She's trying to control the food from the ground up. But she doesn't know about the old co-op routes, does she? I shook my head. Co-op routes? Walter grinned, the kind of grin that meant trouble for someone. Back in the day, before these big distribution companies, farmers around here ran a secret network. Grain, vegetables, meat, you name it, we moved it quietly to avoid corporate middlemen. We can still do it. Fast, quiet, and cash only. I felt a spark of hope. You think the others will go for it? Walter shrugged. If the choice is between going broke or fighting back, I think they'll listen. By the next morning, I was making calls. Some farmers were hesitant, afraid of retaliation, but others were ready to jump in. We planned to start small, 3 farms, 2 ranches, and 1 orchard, moving their goods to out-of-town buyers without Karen's network catching on. It worked. Within a week, food was flowing again, quietly, but steadily. We used old barns as drop-off points, back roads for transport, and cash in hand to keep everything off the books. Karen must have noticed the shift because she started showing up in town more often, her SUVs parked in plain sight, almost as if she wanted me to know she was watching. One afternoon, I stopped by the feed store for supplies and noticed a crowd forming near the courthouse. Curiosity got the better of me, so I parked and walked over. That's when I saw it, posted in big, bold letters on the courthouse bulletin board. County notice, emergency hearing to seize additional agricultural land for community development. And right there, in black ink, my name was at the top of the list. Before I could even process it, Karen stepped out of the courthouse doors, holding a folder and smiling like she'd already won the next round. "See you at the hearing, John," she said. "Better bring a good lawyer this time." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a fresh fire. People around the courthouse glanced between us, sensing the tension. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew if I opened my mouth in that moment, I might say something I couldn't take back. Karen brushed past me, her perfume thick in the air, and slid into the back seat of her SUV. The door shut with a smug thud, and the convoy rolled away. I stood there staring at that notice. If this hearing went the way she wanted, I wouldn't just lose my farm completely, they'd take the last bits of land I had left and hand them over to her community development projects. And I knew exactly what that meant, overpriced homes for out-of-town buyers, not a dime's worth of food grown. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Greg Saunders wasn't just any lawyer, he'd been with me through 2 decades of property disputes, and he hated bullies even more than I did. "She's calling an emergency hearing," I said as soon as I walked in, throwing the notice on his desk. "They're going to try to finish the job." Greg picked it up, scanned it, and leaned back in his chair. "This isn't legal. Not even close. They're bypassing the state's agricultural preservation laws." "But," he paused. "But what?" "She's greased enough palms that they might ignore the law altogether." I sank into the chair across from him. "Then what do we do?" Greg leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We play dirtier than she does." That night, I met with Walter and the other farmers in the old feed mill. We talked strategy until the coffee ran out. Hank suggested we rally the townspeople. Miguel offered to block any equipment rentals to HOA projects. Then Walter leaned back, stroking his beard. You know, back in the co-op days, if a buyer or politician tried to strong-arm us, we'd make their supply vanish. Not just here, everywhere. Weeks without deliveries. People notice real quick when their stores are empty. It was risky. Very risky. But it gave me an idea that went beyond just my town. The next day, I started calling contacts in other counties, farmers, distributors, market owners. I explained what was happening, and to my surprise, they were eager to help. Karen had burned more bridges than I realized. Some of them had dealt with her manipulations before. Within 48 hours, a quiet agreement was in place. Every shipment tied to HOA-owned projects would be delayed, diverted, or cancelled outright. The morning of the hearing arrived, and the courthouse was buzzing. Karen was already there, holding court in the lobby with her allies. She looked over when I walked in and smiled like the cat that caught the canary. Inside the chamber, the county council members sat like judges, ready to decide my fate. Karen's lawyer rattled off accusations: neglect, failure to meet community needs, resistance to modernization. Each word was carefully designed to paint me as the problem. When it was my turn, Greg stood up and dropped a thick binder onto the table with a loud thud. Ladies and gentlemen, not only is this seizure illegal, but it's built on fraudulent reports submitted by members of this very HOA. The room stirred. Karen's jaw twitched. Greg flipped to a section of the binder. We have sworn statements, photographs, and receipts proving that this so-called community development is nothing more than a private profit scheme. And if the council proceeds, they'll be in direct violation of state preservation laws. Karen's lawyer stood to object, but just then, the back doors of the chamber burst open. A young man in a delivery uniform rushed in, carrying a stack of urgent letters. This just came in from every major grocery chain in the region, he announced. The head council member frowned. And what do these say? The young man stepped forward. That as of this morning, every supplier within 100 miles has suspended shipments to HOA-controlled properties. Effective immediately. The entire room erupted in gasps and murmurs, all eyes snapping to Karen. Karen's smile faltered for the first time. She snatched one of the letters from the delivery man's hand, scanning it quickly. The words were like a noose tightening around her neck: effective immediately, suspension of all deliveries to HOA-affiliated properties due to supplier discretion and contractual rights. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. One leaned over to whisper to another. Greg didn't waste the moment. Gentlemen, ladies, you can vote to seize John's land if you want. But without food, without the ability to supply your developments, you'll be sitting on 1,700 acres of useless dirt. And every news outlet in the state will be asking why an entire community is starving while you line Karen's pockets. Karen slammed the letter down. This is extortion, she barked. I finally stood, letting my voice cut through the chaos. No, Karen. This is consequence. You came after me, my neighbors, and our way of life. You took our land, our markets, and even our food. All I've done is make sure you can't profit from the people you've been trying to crush. The head council member banged his gavel. Order. Order. He turned to Karen, his tone cold. Given the circumstances and the evidence of misconduct, this hearing is dismissed. The emergency seizure is denied. Furthermore, he glanced at the binder Greg had handed over. This council will be launching a full investigation into the HOA's activities. The sound of that gavel hitting the block was the sweetest thing I'd heard in years. Karen stormed out, shoving past people as she barked into her phone. But the moment she stepped outside the courthouse, she was met with a wall of angry townspeople. Farmers, families, store owners, they surrounded her, shouting about stolen crops, fines, and lies. Some held up empty grocery bags, a silent accusation that spoke louder than words. I didn't need to say anything. She was finished. In the weeks that followed, the investigation gutted the HOA from the inside. Karen was forced to step down as president, her allies scattered, and her developer friends abandoned the project entirely. Without control over the food supply, without the land she'd stolen, she was just another name on a list of disgraced local tyrants. The court eventually returned my 1,700 acres, but by then, I had already expanded the co-op network Walter had revived. Farmers who had once been competitors were now partners, moving food more efficiently than ever. 3 months later, I was standing in those same fields again, only this time, they were alive. Rows of wheat swayed in the breeze, orchards blossomed, and the sound of tractors and laughter filled the air. Kids ran between the rows, helping their parents gather fresh vegetables. It wasn't just my land anymore, it was our land. The co-op made sure no one person could ever take it all again. And because of the network we built, every store for miles around was stocked with food that came from people who cared about the community, not just the profit. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields gold, Hank pulled up in his truck. He leaned on the door, grinning. "You know, John, I think you might actually control the entire food supply around here now." I laughed. "Maybe. But the difference is, I'm not hoarding it. I'm sharing it." Walter's old saying came back to me then, something he'd muttered the night we planned the co-op revival. Food is power, but only if you use it to feed, not to starve. Karen had tried to weaponize that power. I turned it into something that kept people alive. And that's why, no matter how many Karens showed up in the future, I knew they'd never win. Because this time, the whole community had learned how to fight back, together. And the food? Well, it would always be ours.